The story begins with Bahati. She was a little girl who had lived on the streets for as long as she could remember. When she was very young, her mother was with her, but life was hard. They had no home, no food, and no warm clothes. Her mother got very sick from the cold, and because they had no money for a doctor, she passed away when Bahati was only 5 years old. From that day, Bahati was alone. She didn't know any family, and no one came looking for her. The streets became her home, but they were not safe. Because she was the smallest and always quiet, the older street kids bullied her. They took any food she found, pushed her around, and left her to suffer. Some days, she would go without food at all, her little stomach growling in pain. At night, she curled up in dark corners, shivering from the cold, wishing for someone to save her. But no one ever did. When she cried, people walked past as if she was invisible. Still, she kept moving, hoping that one day something would change. Bahati was now 14 years old. Every morning, she woke up, whispered a small prayer, and set off to the streets to find food. Some days she begged, but most days she searched through trash cans, hoping to find something to eat. That morning, as she walked, she saw a woman sitting on a bench, eating a big piece of bread. Bahati's stomach growled. She stopped and watched, hoping the woman wouldn't finish all of it. Just as she wished, the woman stood up with some bread still in her hand and walked toward a trash can. Bahati's heart raced. She followed slowly, making sure no one else saw. The moment the woman tossed the bread away, Bahati rushed forward and grabbed it. But before she could take a bite, she heard footsteps, many footsteps. She turned and saw the other street kids running toward her, their eyes locked on the bread in her hands. "Give it to us," one of them shouted. Bahati knew what would happen if they caught her. Without thinking, she took off running as fast as she could. The kids chased her, their feet pounding against the ground. She weaved through the streets, her heart beating wildly. Then she saw a petrol station ahead. A man stood beside his expensive car, talking on the phone while waiting for his fuel. Bahati's eyes darted to the car. It looked like the doors weren't locked. With no time to think, she grabbed the handle, yanked the door open, and threw herself inside the back seat. She quickly shut the door and lay down, holding her breath. The street kids reached the station, but didn't see where she had gone. They searched around, looking confused, then gave up and walked away. Bahati stayed still for a moment, listening. When she was sure they were gone, she let out a deep sigh and finally took a bite of her bread. It was cold and a little hard, but to her, it was the best thing in the world. She chewed slowly, feeling safe for the first time in a long time. But she had no idea that her life was about to change forever. Lunga, the owner of the car, was no ordinary man. He was a famous international boxer and a very successful businessman. He was rich, powerful, and lived a life of luxury. But inside, he had a kind heart. As he stood outside, he had seen everything. The way the street kids chased Bahati, the fear in her eyes, and how she had thrown herself into his car for safety. He didn't get angry. Instead, something inside him broke for the poor girl. When his car was finally filled with fuel, he got inside and turned to look at her. She was curled up in the back seat, holding on to the last piece of her bread as if someone would snatch it away. Lunga spoke gently. "Hey, little one, what's your name?" Bahati's hands tightened around her bread, and her voice shook as she said, "Sir, please don't be angry. Just take me somewhere else, and I will get out. I didn't mean to make your car dirty." She sat there, looking down, her face full of sadness. Lunga could see she was scared, but more than that, he saw pain, years of suffering in her young eyes. He took a deep breath and said, "You don't have to be afraid. You are safe here. I will take care of you." Bahati looked up at him, unsure if she could believe his words. No one had ever told her that before. Could this rich man really mean it? Lunga felt something deep inside him, a strong connection to Bahati. He had never felt this way before, but it made him happy to know he could change her life. Without wasting time, he drove her to a fancy boutique and bought her beautiful new clothes. Bahati could hardly believe it. She had never worn anything new before. After that, Lunga took her to a place where she could freshen up and change. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she almost didn't recognize the girl staring back. For the first time in her life, she felt clean, warm, and cared for. But the surprises weren't over yet. Lunga then took her to a big hotel, something she had only seen from the outside. When they sat at the table, she looked around in amazement, her heart beating fast. When the food arrived, Bahati couldn't hold back. She grabbed it quickly, stuffing bites into her mouth as if it would disappear. Lunga smiled gently and said, "It's okay, little one. You don't have to rush. If you need more, just ask." Bahati stopped and looked at him, still chewing. "Okay, sir," she whispered, unsure if this was real. Then, Lunga looked at her warmly and said, "You can call me Dad if you want. I wouldn't mind." Bahati's eyes widened. She had never called anyone that before. Slowly, a tear rolled down her cheek, but this time, it wasn't because of sadness. It was because for the first time, she felt loved. As they ate, they talked, and Bahati told him about her life on the streets. Lunga listened carefully, feeling more and more sure that fate had brought them together for a reason. After their meal, Lunga led Bahati to his luxurious car and drove her home. As they entered his neighborhood, Bahati's eyes grew wide with shock. She had never seen houses so big, roads so clean, and lights so bright. Everything looked perfect, like a dream. When they pulled up to Lunga's mansion, her heart pounded. The gates opened by themselves, and the house in front of her was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. She looked around, unable to believe that people lived like this while others, like her, had no home, no food, and no place to sleep. She swallowed hard, feeling small in the middle of all this wealth. Lunga noticed her hesitation and gently took her hand. "Don't be scared, little one," he said. "This is your home now. You don't have to worry anymore. Whatever you need, just tell me." Bahati looked up at him, her eyes filling with tears. No one had ever said those words to her before. Home. She had never had one. Slowly, she stepped forward, feeling the warmth of the house and the kindness in Lunga's voice. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. A few minutes later, Lunga's wife, Lucia, walked in from the living room with her two daughters, Zari and Zuri. She was a beautiful woman with a warm smile, and when she saw Bahati, she paused, curious about the little girl standing next to her husband. Lucia had been through a lot in her life. Before meeting Lunga, she was married to another man, but that marriage was full of pain. The separation and divorce were the hardest times of her life. She struggled, cried, and felt hopeless. But just when she thought she would never be happy again, she met Lunga. Lunga changed everything. He brought light back into her life, loved her deeply, and treated her daughters like they were his own. He never made them feel like they were from another man. In his house, they never lacked anything: love, care, and a safe home. He was the kind of husband and father every woman and child dreamed of. Now, as she looked at Bahati, she could tell something special was happening. Lunga had brought another lost soul home, just like he had once saved her. Lucia smiled gently at the little girl, already feeling a connection. Lunga smiled and held Bahati's hand as he introduced her to the family. "From today, Bahati is one of us," he said. "I want you all to show her love and make her feel at home." Lucia, Zari, and Zuri all welcomed her warmly, smiling and making her feel safe. For the first time, Bahati felt like she belonged somewhere. Then Lunga added, "Bahati will be joining Zari and Zuri at their school." Bahati's heart skipped a beat. School. She had never dreamed of going to one. Her eyes filled with happy tears, and she whispered, "Thank you." Later that night, Lunga and Lucia sat on their bed talking. Lunga told her everything: how he met Bahati, how he saw the street kids chasing her, and how he felt a strong connection to her. Lucia listened carefully, nodding, understanding his feelings. Then Lunga sighed. "I only have 2 weeks left before I leave for work in another country. I'm going to miss you all," he said. Lucia held his hand and smiled. "Then let's make these 2 weeks special," she said. And that's exactly what Lunga did. He spent every moment with his family, playing, laughing, and making memories. He grew even closer to Bahati, and whenever he met his friends, he proudly called her his daughter. The day had finally come for Lunga to leave for his job. Outside the house, Lucia and the kids helped carry his bags to the car. The air felt heavy, and no one wanted him to go. Lunga hugged Zari and Zuri, telling them to take care of their mother and behave well in school. Then he turned to Bahati. He knelt down and held her hands, looking into her eyes. "It won't be long, my little one," he said gently. "Before you know it, I'll be back. And I'll be calling you all the time, so you won't even feel my absence." Bahati's lips trembled, and her eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. She nodded slowly. Lunga smiled and leaned in, pressing a soft kiss on her forehead. Bahati felt warmth spread through her heart. No one had ever shown her love like this before. He then stood up and hugged everyone one last time before opening his car door. Lucia wiped away a tear and smiled bravely. "Take care, my love," she said. "We will be waiting." Lunga nodded, gave them one last look, then got into his car and drove away. As the car disappeared down the road, Bahati stood there, her heart feeling both full and empty at the same time. For the first time in her life, she had a family, but now a part of it was leaving. As soon as Lunga's car disappeared down the road and the gates closed, Lucia's warm smile faded. Her eyes turned cold. She held Zari and Zuri's hands tightly and led them into the house, completely ignoring Bahati. Bahati stood there, confused. Was she supposed to follow? Why had Lucia left her outside? Slowly, the heavy wooden doors shut in front of her, leaving her alone on the doorstep. A strange feeling settled in her chest. Something didn't feel right. Inside the house, Lucia clenched her fists, her face dark with jealousy. She couldn't believe how Lunga treated Bahati like she was his own blood. He kissed her forehead, spent extra time with her, and even called her his daughter. It made Lucia sick. No, she was not going to let this happen. Bahati did not belong here. This was Zari and Zuri's home, their father, their life. She swore to herself that before Lunga returned, she would make sure Bahati ran back to the streets where she belonged. She was not going to let some street girl take her children's place. Not now, not ever. Bahati's life took a turn she never expected. The warm smiles were gone, replaced by cold stares and harsh words. Lucia made sure she felt unwanted every single day. She gave her the hardest chores, made her eat last, and sometimes even sent her to bed without food. Zari and Zuri, who once smiled at her, now treated her like a stranger. But Bahati refused to cry. She told herself, no matter what, I will stay. Life was hard, but at least she had a roof over her head. She would rather suffer in this house than go back to the cold, lonely streets. So she held on, hoping that one day, things would get better. Bahati was the youngest in the house, but she was treated like a servant. Every day she cooked, washed dishes, did all the laundry, and cleaned the house. On top of that, she had to take care of Zari and Zuri, making sure they were comfortable while she suffered. If she ever got tired or did something wrong, Lucia would scold her harshly. Bahati wanted to cry, but she reminded herself that she had nowhere else to go. She had to survive no matter what. One evening, Lunga called to check on his family. Bahati's heart leaped. This was her chance. But before the call, Lucia had warned her. If you tell Lunga anything, you will regret it. Bahati was too scared to disobey. So when Lunga asked how she was doing, she forced a smile and said, I'm fine, Dad. Everything is okay. Lunga sounded happy and even told her that the schools were opening soon. He also said their nanny, Samantha, would be returning to work after taking care of her sick mother. Bahati felt a small spark of hope. Maybe now things would change. The next day, Samantha resumed her job, and Zari and Zuri went back to school. Bahati thought that with a nanny around, she wouldn't have to suffer so much. But she was wrong. Lucia made sure Samantha only took care of Zari and Zuri, while Bahati was still left to do the hardest chores. If anything, things got even worse. Now she was completely alone in her pain. She wanted to tell Lunga the truth, but fear kept her silent. One weekend, as Samantha was in the kitchen washing utensils, Lucia walked in with a huge pile of clothes. She dropped them in front of Bahati and said coldly, Make sure these are washed and ironed before the day ends. Samantha was shocked. Madam, I can wash them after I'm done here, she offered. But Lucia narrowed her eyes and snapped. I am the boss of this house, and I decide who does what. If you love your job, know your place and don't question me. With that, she turned and walked away, heading back to the living room to enjoy her favorite movie with Zari and Zuri, while Bahati stood there, feeling hopeless. Bahati carried the heavy pile of clothes to the bathroom and started washing. Her hands ached, but she didn't stop. A few minutes later, Samantha walked in and knelt beside her. Let me do it, she whispered. Bahati hesitated. But, Samantha cut her off. No buts. Just sit with me while I wash. Bahati looked at her, unsure, but finally agreed. As Samantha scrubbed the clothes, they started talking. Samantha told funny stories, and soon they were laughing together. For the first time in a long time, Bahati felt a little happy. Every day after that, they grew closer, and Bahati found comfort in Samantha's kindness. With time, Samantha and Bahati became more than just friends. They became like mother and daughter. Samantha was the mother Bahati never had, always there to comfort her and make her laugh. They did chores together, shared stories, and created a special bond. Samantha made sure Bahati never felt alone. Whenever Lucia gave Bahati too much work, Samantha secretly helped her, making sure Lucia never found out. For the first time in a long time, Bahati felt loved and safe, even in a house that wasn't truly hers. But Lucia noticed. She saw how close they had become, and it made her furious. Seeing Bahati happy made her stomach turn. She wanted Bahati to suffer, not smile. She swore to do something about it. If Samantha kept protecting Bahati, then she was going to deal with her too. Lucia started watching them closely, paying attention to their every move. She was determined to break their bond and make Bahati's life so miserable that she would have no choice but to run back to the streets where she belonged. That afternoon, Lucia sat comfortably with Zari and Zuri, watching their favorite show. She looked at Bahati and said, "Go make us some snacks." Bahati obeyed and went to the kitchen. As soon as she started preparing the food, Samantha came in and shook her head. "Leave it to me," she said, taking the ingredients. As she worked, Samantha muttered in frustration, "I can't believe how wicked that woman is. She sits with her kids, laughing and playing, while she makes you work like a servant. And they're even older than you. It's so unfair. I wish your dad knew what was going on." Bahati sighed and looked down. "It's okay," she whispered. "At least I have a home. Besides, Lucia knows I won't tell Dad anything. She takes full advantage of that." Just as she finished speaking, they heard footsteps. Lucia had been walking toward the kitchen and had heard every word. Her face turned red with rage. "What did you just say?" she yelled. Before Bahati could explain, Lucia raised her hand to slap her. But before she could land the slap, Samantha grabbed her wrist, stopping her. Samantha's eyes burned with anger. "You are wicked, Lucia," she snapped. "And as long as I work here, I will never let you lay a hand on Bahati." Lucia yanked her hand back, furious. "You are forgetting your place, Samantha," she shouted. But Samantha had had enough. "I don't care about my place. I won't sit back and watch evil happen right in front of me. Bahati is just a child. She has already suffered enough in life. She needs love, not cruelty. She is not supposed to be anyone's servant." Lucia's hands shook with rage. She had never been spoken to like this before. "Get out of my house," she screamed. "You're fired." Then she leaned in closer and whispered, "If you care so much about Bahati, then say you resigned. Because if you tell anyone you were fired, she will be the one to pay the price." Samantha's heart broke as she looked at Bahati. She wanted to fight for her, but she knew that if she did, Bahati would suffer even more. With a heavy heart, she turned to Bahati and whispered, "Stay strong." Then, she walked out of the house, leaving Bahati all alone. Bahati felt hopeless and heartbroken. The only person who had ever cared for her was gone. She knew that life in the house was about to get even harder. That morning, before the sun had fully risen, Lucia stormed into Bahati's room and yanked the blanket off her. "Wake up," she ordered. "Go wake Zari and Zuri and get them ready for school. Warm their bath, make their bed, prepare their breakfast, pack their snacks, and don't forget to clean the whole house." Bahati rubbed her sleepy eyes and hesitated for a moment. "But Mum, by the time I finish all that, I will be late for school," she said softly. Lucia's face twisted with anger. "Don't you ever call me Mum again. I can't be a mother to someone as stupid as you," she spat. "From now on, you will call me Madam. Do you understand?" Bahati's heart sank, but she nodded. Lucia continued, "And I don't care if you're late for school. You will do everything I tell you, or you will regret it." Bahati swallowed her pain and hurried to do all the chores. By the time she was done, it was already very late, but she still ran to school as fast as she could. At school, things weren't any better. Zari and Zuri were given money for lunch every day, but Bahati got nothing. While they took the school bus, Bahati had to walk the long, dusty road alone. Most days, she had no food to eat at lunch, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. But one person made things a little easier, her best friend, Amina. Amina always saved an extra snack for Bahati, secretly slipping it into her hands so no one would see. It was the only kindness Bahati had left in her life. When Lunga came home for a short break, the whole house was filled with excitement. He brought gifts for everyone, but he had even more for Bahati because Zari and Zuri already had most of the things. Bahati's face lit up with joy as she ran into his arms. She had missed him so much, and she knew that, at least for 1 week, her life would be better. But even though she wanted to tell him everything that had been happening, she couldn't. Lucia had made sure she stayed quiet. Still, for that 1 week, Bahati felt safe. She laughed, played, and enjoyed the love she had been missing for so long. Lunga took them out for playdates, fancy restaurants, and fun outings. It felt like a dream, and for a short while, she forgot all about her pain. One night, Lunga decided to check on the children's school performance. When he saw Bahati's report card, he was so impressed. She was the top student, with the best grades in her class. But when he looked at Zari and Zuri's report cards, his face changed. Their grades were terrible. Lunga scolded them for not working hard and reminded them that school was important. Then, turning to Bahati, he smiled proudly and gave her a special award. "I am so proud of you, my daughter," he said warmly. Bahati felt like she could fly. But in the corner of the room, Lucia sat quietly, burning with anger. She hated seeing Bahati happy, but with Lunga around, she had no choice but to keep pretending. Later that night, Lunga told Lucia that they needed to find another house, help to assist with the work at home. Lucia quickly said, "Don't worry, leave that to me. I will find someone soon." But in her heart, she had no plans to get any help. She wanted Bahati to suffer. The happy week passed by too fast, and soon, it was time for Lunga to leave again. As he packed his bags, Bahati's heart sank. She held onto him tightly, not wanting to let go. "Don't worry, I'll be back before you know it," he said, kissing her forehead. But deep inside, she knew the moment he left, her life would go back to being miserable. As the car drove away, her heart felt heavy. She stood at the gate, watching until he was completely out of sight, knowing that her happiness had just disappeared with him. Later that night, after a long day of work, Bahati finally lay down to rest. Zari and Zuri were already fast asleep in their warm, cozy beds. Just as Bahati was about to drift off, the door creaked open, and Lucia stepped inside. With a cold glare, she shook Bahati awake. "Get up," she whispered harshly. Bahati, still half asleep, sat up in confusion. "From now on, you will sleep on the floor," Lucia hissed. "This is your punishment for showing off in front of Lunga, making my daughters look bad, and trying to steal his attention." Bahati's heart sank. She wanted to cry, but she knew it would only make things worse. Slowly, she got up, took her blanket, and lay down on the cold, hard floor. Lucia smirked, satisfied, then walked out, shutting the door behind her. Bahati curled up tightly, shivering, as silent tears rolled down her cheeks. It was a quiet weekend morning, and while Zari and Zuri sat comfortably in the living room with their mother, Bahati was in the kitchen, working hard to prepare lunch for everyone. The delicious smell of food filled the house, making everyone hungry. When the meal was finally ready, Bahati carefully placed it on the dining table and began serving. But just as she was about to serve herself, Lucia's sharp voice stopped her. "Serve all the food first," she ordered with a smirk. Bahati obeyed, handing out plates filled with food, hoping she would get her share. But when she reached for her own plate, Lucia's cold voice rang out again. "And who said you were eating?" she sneered. Bahati's stomach rumbled, but before she could protest, Lucia made her kneel on the floor and raise her hands. "If you're so hungry, why don't you eat the pepper sauce in the jar?" Lucia laughed. Zari and Zuri giggled along with her, watching as Bahati's face turned red with shame. Tears rolled down Bahati's cheeks, but she stayed silent, knowing that any protest would only bring more punishment. When they were done eating, Lucia stood up and stretched. "Well, I guess there's nothing left. Better luck next time," she said cruelly. Bahati slowly got to her feet, wiped her tears, and cleared the table, her heart heavy with sadness. Late that evening, under the cover of darkness, Lucia made her way to the small, hidden hut of the witch doctor. She had been coming here often, desperate to find a way to break the strange bond between Lunga and Bahati. Sitting across from the old man, she poured out her anger. "How can a man love a child he just found more than his own?" she hissed. The witch doctor, his eyes dark and knowing, closed his eyes and whispered to his gods. After a long silence, he opened them and looked straight at Lucia. "Because she is his blood," he said. "Bahati is Lunga's real daughter, his only child. They don't know it, but their bond is natural. Blood will always call to blood." Lucia felt the world around her spin. She couldn't believe it. The girl she hated the most was the true heir to Lunga's wealth. She had to get rid of her. Lucia leaned forward and whispered her deadly request. "Give me something to end her life," she demanded. The witch doctor grinned wickedly and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in a red cloth. "Bury this in the ground with her hands," he instructed. "Make sure she digs the hole herself. Once it's covered, her fate will be sealed." Lucia grabbed the bundle with shaking hands, her heart pounding with dark excitement. This was it. Soon, Bahati would be gone forever, and no one would ever know the truth. The next morning, Lucia stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and ordered Bahati to go to the back of the house and dig a hole, no questions asked. Bahati, used to following orders, simply nodded and walked outside. She grabbed a shovel and started digging, the sun beating down on her small frame. As she worked, the shovel suddenly hit something hard. Curious, she knelt down and brushed the soil away with her fingers. A shiny ring lay buried in the dirt. She picked it up, turning it over in her hand. It looked old but beautiful. Without thinking, she slid it onto her finger. But when she tried to take it off, it wouldn't budge. She tugged and twisted, but the ring stayed stuck. With a sigh, she gave up and continued digging. Once she finished, she wiped the sweat from her forehead and went inside to inform Lucia. Lucia barely looked at her and coldly ordered, "Go to your room and don't come out." Bahati obeyed, walking away, but she could feel something was wrong. Outside, Lucia hurried to the hole, clutching the red-wrapped piece from the witch doctor. With a wicked smile, she dropped it into the ground and quickly covered it with soil. She stood there for a moment, heart racing, waiting for something to happen. Any minute now, Bahati's life would start fading away. Meanwhile, inside the house, Bahati sat on her bed, staring at the ring on her finger. She sighed and whispered, "I guess you'll have to stay on my finger from now on." Then she noticed how dirty it was. "Let's clean you up first. You've been in the ground for so long," she said, getting up and heading to the bathroom. In the bathroom, she turned on the sink and let the water run over her hand. She took some soap and scrubbed the ring, trying to get all the dirt off. But just as she was scrubbing, something strange happened. The mirror in front of her started to glow. A bright light filled the room, and suddenly, an angel-like figure appeared inside the mirror. Bahati gasped, stepping back in shock. Before she could scream, a calm and powerful voice spoke. "Hey, little one. You called me. What do you need from me?" Bahati's eyes widened in fear. Her heart pounded in her chest. "Me," she stammered. "No, I didn't call anyone. Please don't hurt me." The angel smiled kindly. "Do not fear, child. I am not here to harm you but to help you," he said gently. "Anyone who scrubs that ring calls me. I am a helping angel. Whatever you need, just say it to the ring, and I will grant your wish." Bahati stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. Before she could ask anything else, the angel slowly faded away, leaving the mirror clear again. Bahati ran back to her room, her heart racing. She sat on the bed, staring at the ring. Had she just imagined everything? Or was this real? And if it was real, what should she wish for? After calming down, Bahati sat on her bed, deep in thought. What if it really works? She wondered. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't had a proper meal in days. Maybe I should test it with food. She hesitated for a moment, then touched the ring and moved her hand close to her mouth. Taking a deep breath, she whispered, "Dear angel ring, I haven't had a meal for some days now. I am really hungry. Can you please serve me some food? You said I should ask for anything, and this is me begging for food. Please." She stood up, her heart pounding, and slowly pointed her ring finger at the floor. In an instant, something magical happened. Plates of delicious food appeared right in front of her. There was warm, soft bread, juicy roasted chicken, steaming rice, and fresh fruit. Bahati's eyes widened in shock. It really worked. She dropped to her knees, her hands shaking as she reached for the food. A smile of relief spread across her face, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Thank you, God," she whispered before digging into the meal, eating hungrily. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly happy. Bahati's life changed for the better. She finally had someone who cared for her and protected her, even if it was a magical angel from the ring. Later that night, Lucia slept peacefully, smiling to herself, thinking that by morning, Bahati would be gone forever and she and her daughters would have Lunga all to themselves. But when morning came, Lucia went to check on Bahati and was shocked to find her awake, looking fresh and perfectly fine. Bahati even had a peaceful smile on her face. Lucia's heart burned with anger. How is this possible? She thought. But she couldn't say or do anything, at least not yet. She clenched her fists and stormed out, planning her next move. Lucia was burning with anger. She wanted to make sure Bahati did not go to school that day. So she gave her a mountain of chores, washing all the clothes, deep cleaning the entire house, changing the bedsheets, and making sure all the laundry was hung out to dry. She smirked, knowing Bahati could never finish everything in time. Let's see how she gets out of this one, she thought. If you don't finish all this, there is no going to school, you hear me? Lucia warned. Yes, Mum, Bahati answered calmly. Lucia was surprised. No complaints, no tears. Meanwhile, Zari and Zuri got ready for school, had their breakfast, collected their lunch money, and left happily. Lucia yawned and went back to bed, instructing Bahati to wake her up once everything was spotless. The moment Lucia was out of sight, Bahati smiled and touched her ring. Dear Angel, today I need a big help. I have too much work, and if I don't finish, Mum won't let me go to school. Can you help me finish in 15 minutes? Instantly, magic filled the room. Brooms started sweeping on their own, chairs arranged themselves, clothes washed and hung themselves to dry, and a delicious breakfast appeared on the dining table. In just a few minutes, everything was perfect. Bahati grinned, feeling victorious. She walked confidently to Lucia's bedroom and gently knocked on the door. Mum, I'm done, she said. Lucia's eyes snapped open. Done. Already. She shot out of bed and stormed to the living room, ready to find something wrong. But to her shock, the house was spotless, the clothes were drying outside, and breakfast was neatly set on the table. She blinked, unable to believe what she was seeing. This is impossible. She turned to Bahati, her voice shaking with suspicion. Girl, if you are playing games with me, you will regret it, she hissed. Can I go to school now? Bahati asked, standing tall. Why? Yes, Lucia stammered, too confused to argue. She stood there, watching Bahati walk out of the house, her mind racing. Who helped her? Could it be that useless gateman? He will answer me today. Outside the gate, Bahati whispered to her ring again. Dear Angel, I will be late if I walk. Can you take me to school? She closed her eyes, and the next moment, she was standing at the school gate. Her best friend's eyes widened in shock. How did you get here so fast? She asked. Bahati just smiled. Today, I'm buying lunch, she said happily. Meanwhile, back at the house, Lucia stormed toward the gateman with fire in her eyes. Did you help that foolish girl with the house chores? Are you that stupid? She spat. The gateman looked confused. Madam, I don't know what you're talking about. I have been at my post all morning. I didn't even enter the house. You can check the CCTV footage, he said firmly. Lucia narrowed her eyes. If you think I am foolish, your medicine is boiling, she snapped as she marched back inside. The gateman shook his head, watching her leave. Yours will boil first, he thought. You have mistreated that poor child for too long. You will not end well. Lucia picked up her phone and called Lunga. With a sweet voice, she told him how she wanted to take the kids to the park over the weekend. Lunga agreed and promised to send the money. When the weekend arrived, Lucia dressed Zari and Zuri in their best clothes, excited for the fun day ahead. Before they could leave, she turned to Bahati. You will stay home, clean the house, and make sure dinner and fresh juice are ready before we come back, she ordered. But why can't I go? Bahati asked, her eyes filled with sadness. Lucia's face darkened. How many times have I warned you about asking me questions? She shouted. You will sit at home and be the house girl that you are. No going anywhere, you hear me? Bahati nodded quietly and went back to her room as Lucia and her daughters happily left for the park. After some time, Bahati heard a knock on the door. She opened it and saw the gateman standing there. I thought you might be lonely. I can keep you company, he said kindly. But Bahati shook her head. Thank you, but I'm fine. I just want to rest, she said. The gateman sighed and walked back to his post. Bahati sat alone in her room, feeling frustrated. Why am I always locked in like a prisoner while they go out and have fun? She looked down at her ring and smiled. Wait, I don't have to stay here. She touched the ring and whispered, Dear angel ring, thank you for always helping me. I need another favor. I want to go to the park where my mum took my sisters, but I want to look like the daughter of a billionaire, wearing the most expensive clothes. Instantly, her clothes transformed into a dazzling designer outfit, and in a blink, she was at the park. Zari and Zuri spotted her immediately. They gasped as they admired the stunning, high-class girl standing nearby. Wow, look at her, Zari whispered. She looks like a real princess. Zuri added. They ran excitedly to their mother. Mom, can we go talk to her? Zari asked eagerly. Lucia smiled. Money attracts money. I'm sure she will talk to you. Go ahead, she encouraged them. Without hesitation, they walked up to Bahati, not recognizing her at all. She acted confident and classy, making them admire her even more. Your family must be so rich, Zari said in awe. Just look at your clothes and how you carry yourself. Bahati smiled. Yes, my dad is a billionaire. You guys know him, Mr. Sanko. Zari and Zuri gasped in shock. What? That's one of the richest men in this country, Zuri exclaimed. But why are you so nice to us? Zari asked. You don't have a big ego like most rich kids. Bahati smiled warmly. My dad always taught me to be kind to everyone, no matter their financial status, she said. You never know about tomorrow, so it's always good to treat people well. It's not anyone's fault that some people have so much money while others are starving. Just be nice to everyone. Zari's eyes sparkled with admiration. Oh my God, can we be friends? She asked. Of course, Bahati replied. Well, I'm Zari, and this is Zuri, she introduced. Nice to meet you, Bahati said. You can call me Lucky or Bahati. Just then, a fancy car pulled up. That's my ride. I have to go now. I don't want my dad to worry, Bahati said. She reached into her pocket and handed them a card. Here's my number. We can always talk on the phone. She waved at them and disappeared into the car. Excited, Zari and Zuri ran back to their mother. Mom, that rich girl is so nice. She's nothing like we expected, they gushed. Lucia listened, intrigued. A rich girl with good manners? That's rare. Later, they all headed home. When they arrived, they found dinner already set on the table. Bahati stood there, quietly waiting. Something was different tonight. Instead of making her eat separately, Lucia invited Bahati to eat with them. Not because she had suddenly changed, but because she wanted Zari and Zuri to tell Bahati about their new rich friend with a kind heart. Little did she know, Bahati was already smiling inside, knowing the truth. That morning, Lucia woke up early, took her breakfast, and left the house with a mission. She needed to get rid of Bahati before Lunga stayed home for too long. She couldn't risk him finding out the truth. Without telling anyone where she was going, she hurried to the witch doctor's shrine. Meanwhile, Lunga had made a plan of his own. He didn't tell anyone exactly when he would arrive. He wanted to surprise his family. That afternoon, as the kids sat in the living room, they suddenly heard a car pull up outside. Before they could react, Lunga walked in with a huge smile. The house filled with joy as the children screamed with excitement. They ran to him, hugging him tightly. Bahati's heart swelled with happiness. For once, everything felt right. The gateman followed behind, carrying heavy briefcases. Lunga had brought gifts for everyone. As they sat together, he looked around and realized something was missing. Where is your mum? He asked. The girls looked at each other. Bahati spoke first. We don't know. She had breakfast and left. Lunga's face changed instantly. What? So who cooked for you? He asked, his voice sharper now. The room fell silent. He didn't need an answer. Bahati's eyes told him everything. Lunga sighed, shaking his head. He didn't want to ruin the moment. All right, girls, I'm going upstairs to freshen up and rest for a while. Later, we'll have fun and open your gifts, he said with a smile before heading to his room. Meanwhile, at the shrine, Lucia sat cross-legged on a woven mat, facing the witch doctor. She removed her shoes and leaned forward. I need something powerful this time. Lunga is staying home for too long. Can I trust you? She asked. The witch doctor grinned wickedly. Of course. Today, we will do something quick and deadly. Lucia's eyes widened. Are you sure? What is the plan? She asked, her voice full of desperation. The witch doctor lifted a small bowl filled with dark water. I will mix my medicine, speak to my oracle, and her face will appear in the water. The moment you see her face, you must stab it with this knife. That will be the end of her. He pointed to a sharp dagger beside him. Lucia smirked. Finally, Bahati will be gone forever. Back at the house, Bahati couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling in her chest. Something didn't feel right. As Zari and Zuri sat in the living room watching TV, she quietly slipped away to her room. She sat on her bed, staring at the ring on her finger. Lucia is up to something. I need to know what it is. She took a deep breath and whispered to the ring. Dear angel, I need your help. Show me where Lucia is and what she is doing. The moment she finished speaking, the ring glowed and suddenly, a vision appeared before her eyes. What she saw made her heart stop. Bahati gasped as she saw a vision of Lucia sitting with the witch doctor, a sharp knife clutched in her hand, ready to strike the bowl. So this is her plan? Bahati thought, her heart pounding. But she wasn't afraid. The ring had already revealed her true identity to her. It was the reason Lucia was desperate to get rid of her. Taking a deep breath, Bahati whispered to her ring. Dear ring, confuse them. Each time she tries to stab, let her see her daughters in the water instead, one after the other. The ring shimmered, and Bahati knew her wish had been granted. Back at the shrine, Lucia lifted the knife, her hand steady, but just as she was about to strike, Zari's face appeared in the water. She gasped and stumbled backward. Shaking her head, she tried again, but this time, Zuri's face stared back at her. "I don't understand," she muttered, her hands trembling. Why?" the witch doctor demanded, growing impatient. "All I see here are my daughters." Lucia cried, panic rising in her voice. "That's impossible. Let's switch places," the witch doctor suggested. They changed places again and again, but nothing worked. The confusion on their faces made Bahati smile. She knew it was time for the next step. "Dear Ring," she whispered again, "bring down many sticks and flog both of them. Don't let them resist. Especially Mum, flog her until she runs home. Her days of evil are over." At that moment, the shrine erupted into chaos. Sticks appeared out of nowhere, flying through the air and whipping both Lucia and the witch doctor mercilessly. They screamed and tried to dodge, but the sticks were too fast. Lucia grabbed her things and ran out of the shrine like a madwoman, sprinting as fast as she could. The witch doctor tried to follow, but the sticks wouldn't let him go so easily. Meanwhile, Bahati smiled and gave her Ring one final instruction. "Dear Ring, when she gets home, make her say everything she did to me the entire time I have lived here. And if she refuses to be honest, flog her more until she learns her lesson." With that, she stood up and went back to the living room. Lunga, the gateman, and Lucia's daughters were seated, watching TV and chatting happily. "Come here," Lunga said warmly, stretching his arms toward Bahati. "How has my baby girl been?" he asked, pulling her into a hug. Bahati giggled. "Dad, I'm fine, thank you. But I'll sit close to you instead." They all burst into laughter. "And how is my favorite dad doing?" Bahati added, her eyes twinkling. Lunga smiled proudly. "I am fine, my child," he said, patting her head. The two began catching up about school and life, completely unaware that outside, Lucia was running home, about to face the biggest humiliation of her life. A few moments later, Lucia burst into the house without knocking. She slammed the door shut behind her, breathing heavily like someone was chasing her. Everyone turned to look at her, their faces filled with shock and confusion. "What is going on? Babe, are you okay? Who is following you? What happened?" Lunga asked, rushing toward her. Lucia held up a shaky hand. I'm okay. I just need a moment," she whispered, her voice weak and unlike her usual self. She looked like she was in pain, and her body trembled as she tried to catch her breath. Lunga reached out to hold her, but the moment he touched her, she groaned in pain and collapsed onto her knees. Her body was swollen, covered in red marks like she had been bitten or beaten. "What is going on? Who did this to you? Say something," Lunga demanded, his voice full of worry and anger. Just then, out of nowhere, sticks appeared in the room and started flogging Lucia again. She screamed, covering her head with her hands. Okay. I will talk," she cried out in pain. The room fell silent as everyone watched her. Tears streamed down her face as she finally confessed. "I have been mistreating Bahati since the day she came into this house. I never gave her enough food, never let her go out with my daughters, and I even tried to kill her," Lucia sobbed. Lunga's face twisted in shock and rage. "What are you saying right now? You did what? You are the devil. I was so blinded. I never saw how wicked you truly are. How could you do this to an innocent child? She has suffered enough in life, and she didn't deserve this from you, especially knowing your own past," he shouted, his voice shaking with anger. I know. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me," Lucia begged, tears and sweat dripping down her face. Lunga clenched his fists. "Forgiveness? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? What was so hard about treating her like your own daughter? And listen carefully, I will ask this once, why? Why were you so cruel to her? What was it about her that made you hate her so much?" Lucia hesitated, but the sticks returned, flogging her harder. Stop. I'll say it," she screamed. "Because she is your only real child, Lunga. She is your daughter. Your biological daughter." The room went dead silent. Lunga's eyes widened in disbelief. "What?" he gasped, his heart pounding. "How do you know that?" he asked, his voice shaking. Lucia sniffled, her hands trembling. "I found out at the witch doctor's place," she admitted. Lunga shook his head. "That's not possible. I was told I can't have children," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The truth had finally come out, but it only left more questions unanswered. Bahati looked at Lunga with teary eyes. Dad, it's true, she said. Lucia was so mean to me. She treated me badly, made me feel unwanted, and made me sleep on the cold floor. I went for days without food. One day, she even went to her witch doctor to get medicine to kill me. She made me dig the hole where she would bury the drugs, but while digging, I found this ring under the soil. It saved my life. If I hadn't found it, I wouldn't have survived that day. The ring helped me with chores, gave me food, and even took me to the park, where she only took her daughters. Lunga's heart sank. He felt a deep pain in his chest as he listened to Bahati's words. "I'm so sorry, baby," he said, his voice filled with guilt. "I had no idea this was happening in my own house. I should have protected you." He took a deep breath and asked, "But how do you know that Lucia is telling the truth about you being my daughter?" Bahati smiled slightly and touched her ring. "I already know the story, Dad, but I want you to remember it yourself. Dear ring, please remind my dad of the past," she said. Suddenly, Lunga felt a strange sensation in his head, and memories started rushing back. Years ago, Lunga came from a very rich family. They had many workers, including a young maid named Lydia. Even though she was poor, Lunga liked her, and they became close. Soon they fell in love. But they had to keep their love a secret because Lunga's parents would never approve. One day, Lydia found out she was 2 months pregnant. But before she could tell Lunga, her best friend betrayed her and told Lunga's mother. His mother was furious. She fired Lydia immediately. At that time, Lunga was still in school, and his parents forced him to choose between Lydia and his studies. He chose school. Lydia was heartbroken. When she returned home, her parents were already angry. They threw her out, calling her a disgrace. Alone and pregnant, she had nowhere to go. She lived in the streets, struggling to survive. The cold nights were unbearable. One night, while crying in pain, she cursed Lunga. "I curse the day I met you. I curse the day I loved you. You will never know the joy of holding a child in your arms. You will never have a child," she cried out in anger and sorrow. Years later, after she gave birth, she passed away, leaving Bahati to grow up in the streets alone. Meanwhile, after finishing school, Lunga searched for Lydia but couldn't find her. He gave up and moved on, never knowing that fate would one day bring his daughter back to him. Lunga gasped as he came back to the present. His whole body shook with shock and regret. "Oh my God," he whispered, tears filling his eyes. "I'm so sorry. Please forgive me, my child. I should have looked harder for your mother. I should have never given up." He pulled Bahati into a tight hug. "But God is faithful," he said. "He brought you back to me. He is so great." He held her face gently and smiled through his tears. "I wouldn't have known the kind of wife I had married if it weren't for you. Thank you, my princess." Bahati hugged him back, and for the first time, she truly felt like she belonged. Lunga kissed Bahati on her forehead as they sat on the couch. He held her hands and looked deep into her eyes. "Honey, I want to make it up to you. From now on, you will never lack anything. But first, I need you to decide something. If you want me to send Lucia to jail, I will sue her. If you want to forgive her, I will respect that too. Just tell me what you want, and I will do it," Lunga said. Bahati took a deep breath. Zuri and Zari were just spoiled by their mother, so I don't blame them. But I do blame Lucia for everything. Even though she was cruel to me, I forgive her. But I don't want her in this house anymore. She has to take her children and leave. I can never feel safe around her, Bahati said firmly. Lucia fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Please, my daughter, I have learned my lesson. I will change, I promise. Just give me another chance," she begged. But Bahati shook her head. "No, forgiveness is enough for you. You have to leave," she said without hesitation. Lunga stood up, his face serious. "Lucia, go upstairs, pack your things, and leave. Take everything that belongs to you and your children. I will have my lawyer send you the divorce papers. Make sure you sign them, or you won't like what happens next," he warned. Lucia had no choice but to obey. She walked upstairs, her heart heavy with regret. As she packed, Bahati turned to her father. "Dad, I have one more thing," she said. Lunga smiled. "What is it, princess?" he asked. Bahati walked to the door. "Since Lucia is leaving, I called someone. Someone who showed me true love and kindness. Someone who cared for me even when no one else did." Everyone looked at her curiously. Slowly, she opened the door, and Samantha walked in, looking stunning. The whole room went silent, admiring her beauty. "Please have a seat," Bahati said. Then, she turned to her dad. "Dad, I want you to marry her. She is a good woman. She was always kind to me, and that's why Lucia fired her. Auntie Samantha, please marry my dad, Bahati said with hopeful eyes. Everyone gasped in shock. What? Samantha exclaimed. Lunga stood up. Yes, please marry me. Let's take care of this beautiful angel together, he said. The gatekeeper clapped. Say yes, he cheered. Bahati put her hands together. Please, Auntie Samantha, she begged. Samantha blushed. Okay, I will marry you. Lunga, I have always admired you. You are a kind and good man. But let's take things slow and get to know each other first, she said. Yes. Bahati cheered as she jumped with joy. Meanwhile, Lucia walked out of the house with her 2 daughters, crying in regret as she disappeared from their lives forever. A few days later, Bahati stood by the sea, holding the angel ring in her hands. Samantha stood beside her, watching. Thank you for everything, my dear ring, Bahati whispered. You saved me, protected me, and gave me food when no one else did. But now, I don't need you anymore. I have found my family, my home, and love. I will never forget you. Her heart ached as she threw the ring into the water. Suddenly, a golden glow appeared in the sea, and a beautiful angel rose from the surface. Bahati gasped. It is well, my daughter, the angel said. You are now with your father. I couldn't let you suffer, so I found a way to bring you here. Samantha will take good care of you. And tell your father that the curse has been lifted. He will now have more children. Soon, you will be a big sister, the angel said with a warm smile. Bahati's eyes widened with realization. Mom, that was you? She whispered as tears ran down her face. The angel nodded. Yes, baby. And now I can move on. I am happy, she said. Bahati wiped her tears. Thank you, Mom. I love you so much, she cried. I love you too, my darling. I will always be in your heart, the angel said as she handed Bahati a necklace. Wear this, and you will always feel my presence. Bahati took the necklace and held it close. Bye, baby. See you in another life, the angel said, waving. Bahati fell to her knees, crying. Samantha quickly hugged her, holding her tight. After a moment, she gently helped Bahati put on the necklace. Together, they walked back home, ready for their new beginning. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story. Kindly subscribe, like, comment, and share my video with your loved ones. Turn on your notification bell to always be informed whenever I post another interesting video like this one. Until next time, take care.